The Canadian economy in trouble. Fed stoked fear during the election, and NDP in shambles, and Alberta unrest. All that and more on the Really Big Show this morning. I'm Jim Check with Now Media. On the phone with me, Ian Burns, our managing editor, all the way out there in the nation's capital. But if you look at Kelowna, beautiful blue sky. Our live shot here with traffic flowing nicely. Temperature just under 10 degrees here this morning. Sunshiny skies. How are things looking in the nation's capital?
It's actually beautiful here as well. It's a lot cooler though. It's only about 10, maybe 11 degrees, something like that right now. But it's very sunny and pretty after yesterday's crazy thunderstorm that came to welcome Mark Carney.
There you go, a sign of things to come. And it's showing up in the economy. Canadian economy shrank by 0.2% in February, according to StatsCan. Was driven by diminished activity in mining, quarrying, oil and gas extraction. There you go. Probably expect more of that to come.
But finance and insurance did all right. Well, they didn't actually. If you look at the axis there
The graph, there you
at
can
the
put that
bottom,
graph up.
it's 0.1.
You want to put that up there?
So there's no movement really. This is just stagnation, isn't it? So this is like stagnation, the chart. That's what it looks like.
And March doesn't look any better. A flash estimate for March shows the economy continuing to stagnate, according to StatsCan data.
And it stagnated in the other direction, I think, didn't it? A slight increase, but I mean,
No.
it's still stagnation. The population is increasing faster than the economy is growing, which
Yeah.
means not only is that stagnation, that is actually long-term decline.
Yeah. And the Canadian economy headed for recession, according to a Deloitte outlook, an accounting firm, Deloitte.
Yeah, well, it seems pretty inevitable to me, frankly, considering what the how do I say it gently? The not particularly wise individuals in charge of the United States. What's going on there? I mean, obviously, there's been a lot of politicking from the Liberal Party in particular about this subject, but it is true to the extent that we are obviously going to suffer because of that American self-harm.
And I would say that the reason we're going to suffer a lot, though, too, is because of the position we were in to begin with. We were already in a precarious position where the economy was already suffering. So this just exaggerates the suffering. Business investment expected to fall by 11% in the second quarter and by 3.5% in the third quarter due to uncertainty brought on by that trade war. But business investment in Canada has been falling for quite some time. And it's due to our taxation and regulation and all that stuff. And we've done tons of stories on that, and especially in British Columbia in the forestry sector. Nobody with capital wants to invest in British Columbia because of the uncertainty, the regulation, and just access to the natural resources.
And that lack of investment is having an effect. I mean, if you believe the sort of mainstream economists, that's having a pretty serious effect on productivity. Though there are some other kind of lesser known economists who say that the productivity crisis that's been going on for like 15 years or something now, maybe even longer, that it goes beyond just investment. But obviously that if people are wondering how this applies to them and how this affects their lives, basically that makes us poorer. If we're not as productive, we all become poorer. The country becomes poorer and more ramshackle and run down, and services decline and all the rest of it.
Yeah, the Bank of Canada survey says that they expect 22% of firms to back off of their investment plans in Canada. Another terrible, terrible statistic. Desjardins. So I don't know that Desjardins.
You interviewed a guy with that name a couple of times. You should
Kate
you should have it by now.
Yeah, there you go. We'll hit about 7%, and they're expecting about 75,000 job losses over the next couple of quarters, with the unemployment, export, sensitive industries such as manufacturing, steel, aluminum at most at risk. There you go. And then with that, though,
but if you're wondering, if you want a preview of what Mark Carney's going to say, look no further than what Doug Ford said. He was asked this question about the unemployment rate in Ontario, which goes back a long time as well. It predates what's happening in the US. And right away, his response was, "Well, gee, you just got to look at these tariffs because and everything's to do with the tariffs." But obviously, that this sort of these crises, economic crises, predate the
Yeah.
election of Donald Trump. But
Now
obviously,
they
that's
get
what Doug Ford said, and that's what Mark Carney is going to say probably today, whenever he does his first press conference. He'll be asked that question, and that's exactly what he's going to say.
and the same thing we have here in the province of British Columbia when David Eby blamed, people don't want to invest in British Columbia because of Trump. Well, that's been going on for a couple of years. And that is statistically correct and factual. More millionaires are considering exiting Canada now than during the last election cycle. That's another survey saying that among Canadians with a net worth of more than $1 million, 28% are more are planning on leaving Canada. There you go.
Well, this has happened. I feel like I say this a lot, but there's very good reason for this. In my land of birth, the United Kingdom, this this has been happening for a little while now, and with the election of the Labour Party, that's the one led by Keir Starmer. That's the main kind of liberal left political party in the UK, and obviously one that Mark Carney's quite fond of. With their election, the number of millionaires and high net worth individuals or whatever they call them that left Britain was kind of like actually really shocked people, and it really freaked a lot of people out, and it might actually be having quite serious fiscal consequences in the UK because obviously any treasury in the world leans very heavily on its richest people. So the British now, who already have fiscal problems, they're actually freaking out a little bit and thinking that they're trying to like seduce them to come home, to come back into to Britain so that they can be taxed again. So yeah, like I said, I say this a lot, but I honestly feel like what I've seen in Britain is a preview of what we might experience here with Mark Carney, because Mark Carney is very much part of the British political scene, let's say. He's very interested in it, clearly. And I think the first interview he gave was to BBC. He's very interested in Britain and British politics, and I think he's got sort of roots there. He's got a lot of connections there. And yeah, I'd say this is really one to watch. This is one to sort of keep your eye on.
So this ties, all what we're talking about here ties into that report that was put out by the federal government nonetheless, and Mark Carney laughed it off when asked about it, where it said, if Canada keeps going the way it is in the next 10 years, the people with money will have left Canada, and the remainder will be foraging and killing the wildlife for survival.
What was that, 2050 that was, wasn't it? I think. Or was it
20,
2040, I think, actually.
2040, yeah. So like the next 10,
Yeah.
12 years. I mean, it doesn't happen overnight. It's already starting to happen. And he just
Well, I would
laughed it off.
say, an advantage for Carney is that he's seen what's happened in the UK. Maybe he might have been favourable to the policies pursued by the Labour Party. They were elected in July last year, so they've been in power for sort of nearly a year, coming up for, they'll have their 1 year anniversary in a few months. He's seen what's happened to them, and they've not been successful in any area, not a single area of government. They are extraordinarily unpopular. And the polls now coming out show that if there was an election, they would be completely obliterated. So I feel like Mark Carney, and maybe even to a more important extent, the Liberal Party behind Mark Carney, will be a little bit more reluctant to go ahead with policies like that. So just in the interest of self-preservation, if nothing else.
We shall see, shall we not? But that report was written by the federal government. And the economy, the statistics do not look good. And these statistics were there prior to the tariffs. The tariffs are just going to make things worse. And then so will the new carbon tax that they're proposing to put on industry, which will be a tax on goods as well. There you go.
Let's see. Yeah, I mean, there's so much to be announced still. He's told he's done the campaigning, and he's made a lot of promises, but now's the real period, and this is where we really get to see what he's going to do, rather than when he was promising to do things.
There's also a report, I think, from Fitch saying if Canada proceeds with the Liberal plan, that its credit rating will likely go down.
Well, we saw that. I think people in BC have intimate knowledge of that because it's happened in British Columbia, and it's a direct consequence of fiscal mismanagement. Basically, I mean, there are other ways that you could look at it, but the fiscal position of the British Columbian government is bad. Therefore, the credit agencies, say we don't like that.
So one of the things that
If Carney goes ahead and gets lots more debt, increases the deficit, then and doesn't bring in enough growth, then sure enough, yeah, that is going to happen, isn't it?
So one of the things when you talked about, I just want to make a point here. When on England, when a lot of the people with money left, there are nations out there that don't allow you to take your capital with you without paying large amounts of tax. California is even going to try it by a state measure by saying if you pull your capital out of California, that you're going to be taxed like an exit tax. And there is nations in the world that do that. So, if too many people,
Including Canada. Canada has an exit tax as well.
there you go. So there you go. Hudson Bay. Looking for a glimmer of hope, I guess, for some of its leases. The clock's ticking down on that determines the Hudson Bays. Anyone interested in buying Canada's oldest company and assets, like the iconic Stripes brand, have until Wednesday at 5 o'clock to submit binding proposals. The 355-year-old department store. There you go.
That can't be allowed to happen. Surely, for God's sake, somebody's got to come in. Even if they just buy one, even if they just buy one store in Toronto or something, like it's got to be, it has to survive. It would just be so sad. Like
I would
it's almost like knocking down a beautiful old house or something like that, isn't it? It's like don't do that.
I would say that the Hudson Bay is the canary in this coal mine we call the Canadian economy.
In many ways, yeah, I guess it's kind of symbolic of it represents the Canadian economy in a way, isn't it? That it didn't change, it didn't innovate, it just kind of sat still and expected to
It
dine
would
out on
be
its reputation.
it would be the ultimate representation of our economy because it is older than Canada, much, much older than Canada. And it has been in steady decline. And people don't realize, like, there's many, many economies in the world. Like they'll say that, oh, that's all happening all over the world. There's many, many economies in the world that are doing extremely well, while ours stagnates. And the sad part about it is we should be one of the richest nations in the world based on what's beneath our feet.
Yeah, and there's always the story of obviously I bring up Britain quite a lot. Britain is a cautionary tale. Britain was a rich country. Obviously, it was the world's richest country for quite a long time. Um, but even recently, even when I was a kid, it was a noticeably richer country and also statistically a richer country in terms of everything, GDP per capita, GDP relevant relative to other countries. During the Tony Blair years, there was even a period where it was considered to be richer than the United States, which is remarkable to imagine, but on a GDP per capita level. So I've seen Britain decline just in my own lifetime, and it's shocking, but it can happen. And if it can happen to Britain, which is the world's first modern country, it invented the entire modern world. It had like centuries head start over the rest of the world, and it's still happened to Britain, where it's now declining and becoming a kind of it's almost becoming like a developing country. It's becoming so miserable and impoverished. But then that's one example. But then another example is Argentina, which at the beginning of the previous century and right through till sort of like the 1950s or something like that, Argentina was a very, very wealthy country, and it was sort of famed for its beautiful streets like Buenos Aires and all that. And loads of people from Europe, from Germany and from Italy went there to Argentina. That was like they went there for their new life to be wealthier. And obviously, ever since Peron and all that malarkey, it's just become a complete basket case. So, and obviously, I know Javier Milei is trying to fix it, but that's a cautionary tale. Argentina was a rich country that was very similar, very comparable to Canada. Had a European sort of um, demographics. European immigrants had come over and helped to build this country of Argentina, and went to the dogs.
Yeah, Yves Blanchette there of the Bloc Québécois says the Liberal Party deliberately stoked fears of American annexation in a cynical play for votes. I mean, we said that over and over and over again. He said the Liberals are not where they expected to be. It was a threat from the White House and very clever use of fear in the population by the Liberals who instigated it, said Blanchette. Each time they feared losing ground, suddenly the 51st state came back and there was all this information about Canada's sovereignty. It was, I mean, is what they did, and we said that over and over and over again. And they used it to that was their, literally, trump card.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a two-way. It takes two to tango, doesn't it? And the Canadian electorate, or at least significant, sections of it, wanted to tango. They wanted to play this game. They wanted to believe the Liberals. They wanted to believe in Mark Carney, and they wanted to concentrate on Donald Trump. I mean, you can say this that the Liberals kind of exploited it or whatever, but I mean, of course they did. But Blanchette exploits all kinds of things. Blanchette lives in a fantasy world where Quebec is a net contributor to the Canadian finances. He's completely deluded, and he frequently lies to his audience and misleads them. So, I mean, he's obviously a complete hypocrite and not somebody that is worth listening to. But he is also correct here that the Liberals they exploited the Trump situation, but then the Canadian people wanted to play. Just like Blanchette. Blanchette exploits the sort of Canada-Quebec rivalry or whatever the hell you want to call it. And lots of Quebecois voted for him, They played along with him. So if the electorate kind of wants to be fooled or they want to be manipulated, then what are you supposed to do? Like, and who's to blame?
So he also said some people say Quebec could not face the United States alone. And he said, you know what? Canada can't face the United States alone either. We'll need Mexico and need Europe. And he said he's going to continue speaking to ambassadors. And if you're a country in Europe or some other country in Asia and you look at Canada this morning and say, what the hell is coming for us now? To measure the extent of instability that Mr. Trump is still able to create for the next 3.5 years, there is no capital in the world which does not look at Canada and say, brace for impact.
Well, maybe not Paris and London. I think they're all overjoyed, really, aren't they, with the newest arrival in Ottawa?
No.
But it's another thing he said here, which is of interest and which reveals his true motivations, is where he says nobody should already look at the numbers saying, okay, we can send everybody to hell because we can make a deal with the NDP. He's trying to say to the Liberals, don't do a deal without us because we want all of the goodies that we're going to extract from Ottawa. So that's his real motivation. He's trying to kind of shout his way into some kind of arrangement with the Liberals.
Yeah, and then we have a little clip here from Blanchette that is definitely going to drive a wedge with the West here. So let's play this clip.
We'll have to remain the barrier not to be crossed, protecting French language and secularity of the state in Quebec, and a different model in immigration which has to be successful, and the fact that there's no future for oil and gas, at least in Quebec and probably everywhere, and this has to be said and protected. I have a brand new weapon to do that. Mr. Bonin will be extraordinary carrying that message.
There you go. He's got his brand new weapon.
I mean, just look at the scene. If this was a theater production, if this was a play, you look at the scene and it's like the gun is on the table, the axe is hanging next to the door, and the characters are about to walk in and have a huge fight with each other. Because we're going to talk about Danielle Smith soon, aren't we? So yep. There he is with the gun. Danielle Smith's going to pick up the axe, and all hell's going to break loose.
I think from just in my opinion, Blanchette has been trying to drive division with the West and Canada so that he, under the cover of that, he can drive his own need for sovereignty and division with Quebec and Canada.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Look, again, I apologize in advance. I'm going to bring up Britain again. But the same thing happens in Britain with the Scottish nationalists. It's the exact same playbook. It's precisely the same. He's not interested in the country. He's interested in his objective. He's interested in the reason that he's in politics in the first place, which is separation. But I just feel that the Liberals, you know, the core of their party, the heart and soul of their party, is the sort of Quebec federalists, the ones that oppose the nationalists. So they're kind of, you know, they're not in the best position really to deal with Quebec, I feel, because they're so compromised. You know, they have so much skin in the game that they kind of struggle to deal with Quebec. Whereas some have argued Quebec actually needs to receive the heavy hand once in a while and actually be told that it's not going to get what it wants all the time. And also, yeah, you know, maybe somebody should lay it on the table. What would Quebec separation actually look like? If Quebec actually became an independent country, for starters, it would be mercilessly bullied by the United States. It would also be bullied by Canada, and it would be bullied by everybody else because it would be a tiny country that was kind of hanging off the end of North America. It would also potentially lose its the northern part of the province, because the indigenous people who inhabit a lot of that territory might just say, no, we don't want this. We want to be with Canada. In which case it would be a kind of, you know, a rump state on the St. Lawrence. They need to be told, I think, you know, and also they would be a lot poorer and they would struggle. Maybe they should actually be presented with the facts, and it might start changing their minds a little bit.
Yeah, they are the net beneficiary of that Alberta oil, which he says he doesn't want.
Well, the net beneficiary of Canada. The whole Canadian project in some ways seems to just be to the benefit of Quebec. And yet obviously he resents Quebec as well. You know, he bites the hand that feeds.
Right. NDP in shambles, decimated in even BC strongholds. So what does that say for the NDP? They only got 3 seats in BC after winning 13 in 2021, and including losing Jagmeet Singh's seat.
Well, the question is, look, you're an older gentleman, been around a while, quite wise. You've got a lot of knowledge, and also you've been talking about politics every day for the last few years. Very interested in politics. If I ask you a simple question, what does the NDP stand for? What's your answer to that?
Yeah, I don't even think I know. To me
exactly.
It's
so what's the point?
it's irrational. It's irrational at best. Like, he didn't offer any solutions. It was just sound bites, irrational sound bites, not based in any fact. You talk about Blanchette saying things. At least to me, Blanchette, you can tell what Blanchette wants and is doing. It's very clear what Blanchette is doing. He's looking after Quebec's interests. It's definitely Quebec first in his mind, what he believes is best for Quebec. As far as the NDP goes, I have no idea what it is that they're trying to do, especially on the national stage. Like, a lot of his comments made no sense at all, and they were just irrational. I do credit them for, you know, they did the Liberals took credit for it, but that was their dental plan. And my dad was an NDP guy, and he was big in the NDP and was a jobster in the IWA and all that stuff, and he was a staunch believer in the NDP. And they used to be the social conscience of Canada, and they're no longer a social conscience. I don't even think a lot of that party, Jagmeet Singh, even likes Canada or what Canada represents. How's that?
Yeah, I think that's accurate. For a lot of members and a lot of voters for that party. Yeah, it is a kind of. It's almost like the far left of the Democratic Party in the US, which also doesn't really seem to like the US and seems to almost.
Yeah.
They seem to almost think that America was a mistake, and I get that from Canadians, some NDP people as well, and Liberals, to be fair, where they seem to think that Canada was like it was an accident of history, and maybe it's something to regret. Like, maybe Canada shouldn't have actually been created because it upset so many people in the process. You do kind of hear that, don't you? And in which case, that's almost like a kind of nihilism, isn't it?
Yeah, because the NDP used to represent the unions and the workers. Look at the union. Who were the union endorsing? They were endorsing the Conservatives. which is a complete flip.
Indeed.
They weren't endorsing Jagmeet Singh. If you look at his rallies, they were small, and there were people, he was basically taking advantage of some people. That's where his support was, and it was an opportunist party to. I mean, if you even look at his representation, a Rolex-wearing guy driving a Maserati talking about workers' rights. He definitely didn't carry the flag.
But also just look at Windsor, that all important city, that all important area, and Hamilton and all that. They didn't vote. They didn't vote for the NDP. You'd think that that they give the impression that the NDP exists for people like that, like the auto workers and all the industrial heart of Canada down there in southern Ontario, and they didn't vote for the NDP. So I mean, they need to come up with a reason to exist, and it has to be more. It has to be more than just we don't like the billionaires or something along those lines. Because nobody's buying that anymore. That doesn't sell, I don't think.
I think longtime watcher of the show, Chrystia Freeland, there, what she said of what the Trudeau Liberals had been doing for the past 10 years, virtue signaling and identity politics is really what you could center around the NDP, and with no clear plan, no clear vision, and I think most people with any common sense had abandoned that party. And like some people even said, did this party self-sabotage for the Liberals? Because the party basically, I mean, that's part of the reason that the Conservatives lost, is the NDP imploded on itself.
Well, absolutely. I mean, that was you can look at the graph, and as the NDP support collapses, the Liberal support surges. I mean, obviously we haven't had a detailed study after the election, but I mean, it's pretty much obvious, isn't it, that that's what happened.
So you can either say the Liberals were smart in playing it and getting the Liberals to or the NDP to self-implode, or they were colluded to self-implode. Who knows, right? But definitely the statistics say they self-imploded to the benefit of the Liberals.
Well, he said himself, didn't he? Jagmeet Singh, he said himself that he just he was asked, why didn't you call an election earlier? And he just said that he could not stomach the idea of Pierre Poilievre as Canada's prime minister.
They would have been.
I mean, I don't know if that's just him trying to retroactively excuse himself, but he obviously thinks that. And he didn't have to say that, did he? I think we all know that he thoroughly despises Pierre Poilievre and everything that Poilievre stands for. So I think, he did have a mission in his mind to stop Poilievre. And I suppose he'll probably think, won't he, in 10, 20 years, in retrospect, people will look at him and say, okay, he forced the Liberals to do dental care, pharmacare. He pushed a lot of other things, a lot of policies that he was interested in. And he kept Poilievre out, not just out of office, but he prevented Poilievre from being the prime minister with possibly the largest majority in the history of Canadian democracy. So he's going to look back or he might think people will look back and say, all right, yeah, he was actually a success. But will people really say that if the NDP ceases to exist, which might happen in the next year or two?
So he may be remembered as the architect of the demise of the NDP party.
Yeah, and look, there's a lot. History is being written every day. We don't know what's going to come of this election win. It could be, as we've talked about earlier, as we discussed, it could herald the end of Canada. We don't know that yet. This could be the beginning of the end of this country as we know it. It could lead to the separation, or it could lead to Alberta or Quebec leaving Canada, which would in effect be the end of Canada. And if that happens, then as somebody who helped this come about, Singh's reputation would then be ashes, wouldn't it?
David Eby asked if he would step up and become the leader of the NDP. And he said, no, thanks.
I mean, quite a downgrade, isn't it? I don't know why he would. I don't know why he would bother.
I mean, here you have this party in shambles. But the NDP of BC are connected to the NDP of the National Party. And maybe if the NDP molds into the Liberals, then the NDP might as well do that as well.
Yeah, it'd be a funny one, but I mean, it's always been the provincial NDP, not just in BC, but elsewhere. Ontario, I'm thinking of, and
Oh,
Manitoba. They're a different, and definitely Alberta. They're a different species, aren't they? They're something else. Even though they have varying degrees of connection to the Federal Party, they are different. And they actually focus on the bread and butter stuff most of the time. Anyway, they're supposed to, like healthcare and things like that. But yeah, I think the provincial NDP parties, they have what the Federal Party doesn't have, which is like focus. They have a topic. They have a narrative.
and one of them is not business climate, because that is not very good in British Columbia right now.
Yeah. Well, nor is healthcare, but and many other things. But at least that is their story. That they have a story to tell, and people know what the NDP, loosely speaking, people know what the NDP stand for in BC, don't they? Whereas maybe it's really not obvious on a federal level.
Right. Elections Canada said this was a big night.
Yeah,
Oh,
the most votes ever.
yeah, best. Well, it says best since 1993. That's 68% in the federal election there. So,
That's turnout. But
right.
in terms of the number of people, but that's obviously because
All right. Yeah. Yeah.
courtesy of
Total
Justin Trudeau, Canada's
immigration. Yeah.
population is a hell of a lot bigger than it was in 2015.
Well, and it turns out when we did that live show and we talked about that, we were expecting about 19 million people to vote, and we were pretty damn close. 19.5 million voted.
Still, it does still surprise me though, because this election was very hyped. Like it was seriously a hyped election. Must be one of the most like high profile elections in the last God knows how long. Very recent, like recent Canadian history, let's say. And yet the turnout is what was it, 68%? Like that's not much, considering that the Americans in 2020, like what was the turnout there? It was like 80 something percent in the US, wasn't it?
Yeah.
In Biden's victory. So
Yeah.
it's a bit disappointing, I think, for democracy.
Yeah, former Liberal leader Michael Ignatieff has encouraged Mark Carney to strike a deal with Conservatives to reach a majority. I don't see that happening, but you remember Michael Ignatieff?
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of leader that I think Pierre Poilievre wishes he could compete against. A sort of chin-rubbing philosopher king. Like, not so much emphasis on the king bit. But yeah, I mean, this is an interesting little interview anyway. It's about 30 minutes chit chat, and he's very kind of, he's not political anymore, not particularly. So he's actually capable of being honest. And he says, I think the most interesting thing that he says is he goes into the actual practical way in which Donald Trump could annex Canada if he chose to, and he talks a lot about like the international financial system, and he kind of takes the wind out of Carney's sails a little bit, even though he's a supporter of Mark Carney's, because he says, look, if the Americans really wanted to, they could cripple Canada. They could absolutely paralyze the Canadian economy and send Canada spiraling if they chose to do it, through various means, including their control of the dollar and all the rest of it. They could sink the Canadian currency, obviously. I mean, there's so many things that they could do to destroy Canada. And then he said, look, at that point, Canadians might ask themselves, is this worth it? Is it worth being this poor? Or should we just accept the US as our overlord kind of thing? But that pops Carney's bubble, doesn't it? Because Carney's playing the tough guy, and he's saying like, I know how international finance works. But obviously, Canada could be gobbled up by the US if they really put their mind to it.
Yeah, you raised a really valid point there, and that is the currency. And the Americans have done it in the past with other countries in crippling currencies, and that happened even with the UK with Brexit, where the currency was attacked by certain individuals to see if they could do that. I mean, Canadian currency would be a lot easier to attack than some like the UK currency. Venezuela,
a
let's
guy
look at
you may have heard
Venezuela.
of.
What's that?
Exactly, yeah. I was just going to say a chap that you may have heard of called George Soros
Yeah.
made a large proportion of his fortune by ransacking the British pound. It is possible, and he wasn't he wasn't in control of the U.S. government or the Federal Reserve or anything like that. He was just in charge of an investment fund, a hedge fund or whatever. But you say that they've done it to Britain. Very famously, indeed, they did it, or infamously, they did it in 1954 during the Suez Canal episode, where the British, French, and Israelis tried to go in to secure the Suez Canal to stop the Egyptian nationalists from taking control of it. And Eisenhower, the US president, said, "You're not going to do that. We don't like this. Stop." And then the threat was delivered to the British. We actually have evidence of this. The threat was, if you do it, we will destroy the pound, and we'll turn you into a third world country, basically. And as everybody knows about the Suez Crisis, the British pulled out and they went off with their tail between their legs, and that was the last we ever heard of the British, really, as an independent force in the world. So you're right, and not only you're saying Britain's a bigger economy than Canada now, but back then Britain was like the number 3 economy in the world and military. It actually had power then in 1954, and the Americans just destroyed British power with one single threat.
Yeah, and then we just can look to Venezuela, which was a very wealthy, oil-rich nation, and they collapsed the Bolivar, or how do you pronounce that? Bolivar. That
Are you talking about the leader?
no, the
Chavez,
currency.
you mean?
Yeah, no,
Oh,
yeah.
the currency, yeah,
Currency
right, yeah.
just collapsed. Like they had inflation reached 1,000,000% by late 2018. The country was just in shambles. They destroyed its currency.
Yeah, and we've seen it in Zimbabwe is another country in Africa, that one.
But
Where else have we seen it? I mean, it's happened so many times now, hasn't it? Like you can be destroyed as a country if your currency is targeted either by an outside force or by an inside force.
so 90% of that population of Venezuela now lives in poverty. And 7 million Venezuelans fled since 2015. I mean, that was an oil-rich nation. Lots of people used to go there and invest. And it just got destroyed. And the Americans were definitely part of that destruction of Venezuela.
I believe that they have the world's largest oil reserves, the Venezuelans, and it's very similar to Canadian oil. It's very, it's the heavy stuff. Which is why, sometimes we hear that threat, don't we, from the Americans, like, oh, we'll just go to Venezuela then, because a lot of their refineries are built to process
Yeah.
Canadian oil. But yeah, I mean, Venezuela is it's just a doomed country, isn't it? But they set themselves against the Americans with Chavez,
Yeah.
who's a kind of sub-communist dictator type individual. And yeah, once the Americans are sort of batting against you, you're mincemeat, aren't you, really, in most cases?
Yeah, we have to remember the Americans own the SWIFT system too, and that's the way that people trade dollars across, and they also own the currency, the world's currency, right? And Canada doesn't even have any gold to stabilize its currency, because that's one of the things that has helped some countries stabilize its currency is the gold reserves. Canada has zero. Our reserves are mostly in UST bills.
Yeah, although that could be used theoretically as a threat. The Chinese and Japanese have already sort of done that a bit. You can really screw over America, but I mean, the thing is, they would still win. They'd still win in the end.
We don't have what China has for T-bills, nor Japan. Like our holdings.
No.
Very small.
That's why Carney mentioned them, didn't he? Mentioned Japan in that context. But then, as in like, we have tools in our box, but it's kind of like that would require Japan to, join forces with Canada against the US, which is not something that I can foresee.
Well, for one major reason, Japan will never go against the United States, and that would be the U.S. military that's parked there protecting them from China.
Indeed. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like Canada can't exactly say, well, we'll replace the American military with our military, and you don't have to rely on the United States. The Japanese are heavily reliant on the Americans for protection from the big bad China next door to them.
Yeah. Well, there's also the risk that, the Koreans and the Japanese still hate each other. There's still a possibility that one day they could have
They-
another fight.
Having
But I think, sorry, what?
having Japan sell out the United States to the benefit of Canada would be that would be the biggest pipe dream ever.
Yeah. But I'd also say, look, Mark Carney, he mentioned that. I think it was in that BBC interview. And just look at any of his rallies or whatever. He talks tough in public about the US, but we now know, courtesy of that story that came out last week, I think it was last week, that behind closed doors, he's a lot more switched on and sensible, and he's speaking in a much more conciliatory way to Donald Trump. He's not playing Dirty Harry on the phone to Trump, is he? He's doing that to get, or he was doing that to get elected. Now he's done that. So even Carney recognizes that.
Yeah. Doug Ford, speaking to the Peel region, making an announcement: the federal government's broken bail system, announcing new permanent bail teams made up of special prosecutors for a comprehensive overview of the bail system, and calls in feds to bring in stronger penalties.
This is I actually watched this press conference live because it was only a couple hours ago, hour and a half ago, something like that. And this is a big story, and you're going to be lots of videos. It's a shame that that there weren't any videos available actually when I set this up. But he's come out and it's very fascinating if you consider, like, where's Doug Ford been this whole election? He hasn't said anything like this. And then as soon as Carney wins, he's coming out and he's talking about bleeding heart judges. He's saying judges should be elected, and he's like saying, I get elected, in a huge election, millions of people vote for me, then I try and do something, and then a judge overturns it who nobody elected. He was saying they're all politically appointed, they're all liberal judges, the liberal government has screwed up bail. And he was, it was really heavy stuff. He was like saying, he even said, like, I've been wanting to get this off my chest for 7 years. And he was furious. I've never seen him so angry, actually. And I think it was genuine for once with
but
Doug Ford, who's
was
sometimes a bit fake.
He was silent during the election, obviously, with no love for Pierre Poilievre. And, there's talk out there that says that he wants to be the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada.
He was asked that question. Like, it's the obvious question. One of the journalists said, "Where was this Doug Ford when Pierre Poilievre was campaigning on these exact points? Why weren't you out there championing Pierre Poilievre, who surely would have been better than Mark Carney, and for him and his priorities?" And then he came out and he basically confirmed that they don't like each other, because he said, "I had an election in Ontario a couple of months ago, and the federal Conservatives were told, do not, under any circumstances, campaign alongside the provincial Conservatives in Ontario." So he's obviously paid back the favor, and it looks like he blames Poilievre for the breakup.
Well, there you go. And then Daniel Smith had some stuff to say. We're going to play this clip first. Let's play this clip.
To Alberta separating? I feel that question wasn't directly answered.
Well, not by me. I believe in Alberta's sovereignty within a united Canada. However, there is a citizen-initiated referenda process that if citizens want to put a question on a ballot and get enough of their fellow citizens to sign that petition, then those questions will be put forward. Again, I don't want to prejudge what a question might be, but not by our government.
There you go. And that question, that is out there now. And we're going to play the second clip before we start talking about this. Here's another clip from Daniel Smith.
Well, I think Albertans are hurt and betrayed. That's how I think Albertans are feeling. I think Canada as a whole got a sense of that feeling of hurt and betrayal with the way the Americans are treating us right now. But we've been treated that way for the last 10 years. Treated like our interests don't matter. Treated like our economic imperatives aren't important. Treated like we should be just shut up and just be satisfied with whatever the central government decides to do, regardless of whether it's constitutional or not. I think that's what you were seeing in this last election. And I think Albertans want to share my view that we want to be able to have Alberta sovereignty within a united Canada. But we also would like to see Team Canada be on Team Alberta for once. And that's what, when I say I live in hope that that's going to happen, it hasn't happened for the last 10 years. And so that's part of the reason why I think Albertans are frustrated I think that they were hoping for a big change, and they didn't get it last night. So I'm going to do what I can to work with the current government, as I always have, to find areas of common agreement and to try to address those things that have been causing some of that feeling of betrayal and hurt. And hopefully we'll be able to forge a stronger approach with our fellow premiers, and a recognition from the federal government that they've got to honor the Constitution.
I do think Blanchette is trying to stoke the resentment that Alberta has in trying to get them to go down that path so that he can hide under the cover of that to drive his own needs for separation.
Yeah, well, it's the kind of game that politicians play with everyone else's lives, isn't it? That's the sort of method that they've been known to apply. But either way, not just Blanchette, but Danielle Smith represent enormous challenges for Mark Carney. He's really, and it's kind of like you could say, all right, he's just resurrected the Liberal Party. Nearly every single Liberal MP now owes their job to Mark Carney personally, and that will certainly be the dynamic in the Liberal Party now. That will be how it's translated, and they'll all feel like beggars and servants at the feet of Mark Carney, who's come and rescued them. So in that context, usually that means somebody like Mark Carney in that position is then free to kind of disappoint those MPs a little bit by doing something like helping Alberta with a pipeline or whatever, like maybe easing off on some of those bills that they despise, that they refer to as the anti-pipeline bill and all that. He could theoretically do that and sort of patch up the relationship with Alberta, and then all's well in the world. But the problem for Mark Carney is if he does that, then Blanchette will squeak, and then he's got the Quebec problem. It's like it doesn't really matter which direction he goes in. There's going to be somebody very, very unhappy about it, or like entire regions of the country very unhappy about it. So I feel like he can either just try and continue down the middle and upset everybody, which is what Justin Trudeau did, or he can lean into one. And I mean, I don't know which one is he going to choose? Which one's most likely to preserve him and his idea of Canada? I mean, my feeling is that it would probably be Quebec.
I would I'd say that as well, because who holds the voting power? It would be Quebec.
But also, I think it's even deeper than that, isn't it? I think it's like very much an identity thing for the Canadian elite. I think Alberta to them is a distant, incomprehensible place where people wear cowboy hats and love oil, and it's so far away. I don't think they understand it. I don't think they know anything about it really. Whereas Quebec is like the essential sort of Canadian province alongside Ontario in their minds. So I think it's like it's a heart and head thing for the Liberals.
And I think put another way, they would look at Alberta as that uncouth, distant, awkward cousin.
Yeah, 100%. I think they look down on Alberta as like culturally less sophisticated than the urban parts of Ontario and Quebec. And they feel most at home in places like Montreal, don't they? Which is like it is a very culturally rich city, but I think that's where they feel comfortable.
And if you want a television show that kind of plays up to it and that really kind of like nails it, it would be Beverly Hillbillies, where they when old Jed shot up the ground and up came bubbling oil, and they got very wealthy, and but they were treated like they were kind of like backwoods people, and I think they do have the money, and Alberta does have the riches, Canada's riches underneath its feet there, but they do get treated very poorly, and that I don't think anybody can argue about that.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody would argue that it's not just that they have this prejudice against Alberta in the West. It's also cynical and self-interested, because there is a fundamental antagonism between Quebec and the Western provinces, particularly Alberta. Their interests diverge in a dramatic way, even more dramatically than Alberta, BC, which is another sort of rivalry that's played up a lot.
Just look at the differences in how the tariffs were tackled with Saskatchewan. The auto tariffs were the all and be all, whatever the everything to save the auto sector, and fight Trump and the auto sector. Nothing for Scott Moe and the canola industry. Nothing. Not even a talk about the Chinese tariffs and how it was destroying the canola industry.
Yeah. Well, same with supply management, which is, we know for a fact that that's something that really upsets the Americans. It's probably top of their list. And when all these arguments were coming out by people who were trying to support Trump, they were talking about the tariffs on dairy and things like that. They didn't seem to understand it, but that was their main sort of like exhibit in the case for the prosecution, wasn't it? And that's Quebec. I mean, also Ontario, but that's Quebec that benefits most from that supply management system. And obviously, that's not even on the table. Like, they're not even going to talk about that. And it isn't even just the US. It's also a problem that the EU countries have complained about, and the British. It's like something that really upsets a lot of countries around the world. That has a really negative effect on Canada's ability to do trade deals. But it gets preserved. And the auto industry gets preserved, as you say, because that helps Ontario and Quebec to a lesser extent. And then, like that high-speed rail line, obviously that gets approved, and that's lots of noise is made about that. But then when it comes to canola, yeah, I mean, nobody cares. It's crickets at that point.
No. Donald Trump celebrated 100 days in office. The U.S. economy shrank at the start of Trump's second term, with GDP declining at about 0.3% annualized rate for the 3 months ending in March. So I guess 2.5 of those months would be under his. I mean, I did watch bits and pieces of an interview he was doing. One of the things, no, we're not there yet, Rommel, but oil has gone from $90 a barrel down to $60 a barrel. And the energy is everything. Energy is everything. You're going to start to see those deflationary trends show up in the economy, especially in the United States. Oil is huge. Like $90 a barrel to $60 a barrel is absolutely huge.
Yeah, bad news for Alberta, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Given what we were just talking about.
And especially when again, Western Canadian Select always sells at a discount. So that would even be lower than what the $60 a barrel that the American oil is selling for, West Texas Intermediate.
Yeah, indeed. But this is obviously Trump will, as usual, because he's the world's greatest election campaigner, isn't he? I would say, and sort of propagandist, if you want to put it that way. He'll come out and say that this is all fine, it's nothing, and all of his little servants will agree with him. But the reality is, this is obviously bad news. And this is like, the Republican Party is going to look at this and start to feel a bit more bold, I think. And especially if in the second quarter, there's another decline, then you're going to start to see a lot of noise, and Trump's agenda is going to be severely curtailed, I would say.
He's facing really big pushback on the tariff wars for sure, especially the tariff wars on all fronts. And they're expecting deals, and I haven't seen any big deals signed yet, but Trump has been saying that there's deals coming. So we shall see. And China has backed off on some of the tariffs, so there is some blinking going on there, but we shall see.
But trade deals sometimes they take like 10 years to negotiate. Sometimes people, very competent, ambitious people, will devote basically their entire career to one trade deal. Like, that happens. So I just don't understand, like, how are they supposed to negotiate a trade deal in such a short period of time? It just doesn't seem plausible. So I think it'll be less of a trade deal and more of like a token concession of some kind that Trump can then like hold up to his adoring slave supporters and say, look at this, look how great I am. And then they can clap. But I mean, I just don't know. I mean, they're not going to get real trade deals out of this, though. Anyway, that's what I would say.
One of the things that he is claiming in his first 100 days as a big success is the closing of the southern border. I think that is statistically successful for sure, because I think they're seeing 95% less crossings, something like that. That number is.
Yeah,
it's dramatic, and that was the number. Remember when the Biden administration said they couldn't close that border because they needed Congress to pass a bipartisan bill. And it turns out Trump closed that border on his own within 100 days. I think it was
It's
within
damning,
weeks.
isn't it, of the Democrats?
Within weeks, that border was closed. But he did use every tool in his toolbox, including the U.S. military, and also a lot of more agents at the border, border patrol, and all that kind of stuff. So the border has, in effect, been closed at the southern exposure for sure.
A lot of it is also about the noise that you make, the words you say. Like the Democrats, you know, they were full of compassion, weren't they? And they were they tried to seem like they were very compassionate, and they were trying to understand the people that might come to the border, and they changed that system that was in place. The one where they sent them, I can't remember what they called it, but where they sent them right back into Mexico straight away. And instead they went with the system where they bring them into the United States and give them a court date, sometimes years in the future, and say, please attend this court date. Meanwhile, off you go into the US, never to be heard from again in many cases. So I think, yeah, the Democrats they approached it the wrong way, whereas Trump is just all about like, there is no way you're getting in here. I'm going to send the military. I'm going to do this. Like that has an effect because all these people who present themselves as refugees or asylum seekers or whatever at the border, they all obviously have phones and the internet connection. Like they're as plugged into the debate as anyone. They're interested in it. And if it's all scary and negative, they're just not going to bother.
And do you know what you don't hear right now? You don't hear a lot of the Mexico-U.S. tariff war, because there is that relationship between those two has seemed to have gotten better. And Mexico did agree to stop the caravans coming up through Mexico, and they have done that as well. And so that has definitely helped even ease the pressure at the border. Never mind, like when there was tens of thousands of that, looking to cross the Rio Grande.
Yeah, but I would say in terms of tariffs, the Mexicans haven't been cut any slack. It's right though. They've adopted a much more conciliatory approach. They didn't really retaliate. They threatened to retaliate, but they didn't. If you contrast the Mexican approach with the Canadian approach, they've been a lot more like cool and conciliatory. They haven't gone in for the fight. Whereas Canada has fought. Canada, even right now, has tariffs in place on American goods, and yet the American tariff regime doesn't see any distinction between Mexico and Canada, So in that sense, the Mexicans might be thinking like, well, what the hell was the point? We've been so nice to them and they've still shafted us just like they've shafted the Canadians.
I think you're going to see some easing of these tariff things because there's a lot of pressure in many circles in the United States talking about easing these pressures. And so it might be isolated as opposed to just like this broad shotgun approach to tariffs. But let's move on to markets here. The stock market in general is, basically just chopping right now, right? And we've seen some up days, a lot of up days after the big drops. And now we're starting to see chop. And what you get when you see chop is basically a baselining for a move higher, right? So I think this chop is starting to show some stability. And then, so once you've had those plunges, now you can look at definitely some basing and then likely some movement upward. Because if you look at the, I can't put it up here, but if you look at the chart, you'll see those big plunges downward. And now you can probably look for some of that chopping for a bit. And then we can look at that in some of the other charts as we go ahead here. Here's gold, our friend gold. That spike through 3,500 again when they hit those psychological barriers. You look at that, that's typical, right? So it hit the $3,500 mark, spiked through it, and then fell off, a couple $300, $200, and now it's going to chop in here as it builds that base to kind of backfill, and this is a typical trading pattern. So there you go. So here's this chopping going on. The geopolitical tensions continue to support gold going higher, especially the tariff wars definitely support gold. Then we look at our friend crypto. Crypto again built that base. It chopped in there. If we look at the chop there on the right there, and it's starting to build its momentum to go back to challenge its old highs. There you go. If you're a technical analyst, you can take a look at that and say, that's how things do. They chop along. And Canadian dollar, again, with the election, it's kind of now finding a chop there too. And if the credit rating gets downgraded, that will not be good for the Canadian dollar. There is a lot of analysts out there calling for a lower Canadian dollar, especially if our unemployment numbers go higher. I do believe that the Bank of Canada will have no choice but to stimulate this economy, because it's going to go into life support here. A 10% unemployment rate would be devastating for the Canadian economy, but it's about to go to 7, they believe, and 10% would be just horrific in Canada, and they're going to need to stimulate this economy. There you go. There's the Canadian dollar. And again, the Canadian dollar would be the one weapon if you were trying to cause a lot of grief for Canada. I mean, that's everybody's wealth is really tied up in the Canadian dollar, really, if you think about it.
Yeah. I mean, Mark Carney, he kind of, in some ways, he won this election based on his credentials, didn't he? On his CV, his glorious resume, as he tried to present it. But for all that, I think he's 60, isn't he? 60 years old. Like, this time in office now will determine his reputation for the rest of his life, and for the rest of our lives, while we remember that he existed, for the rest of history. So, there's a lot riding on this for Mark Carney. He had this reputation, didn't he, which many have argued is wildly overrated for his time at the Bank of England and Bank of Canada. But if we can see the storm coming, can't we? If he can't figure out a way to get us through it without capsizing, then yeah, bad news for his reputation.
So the Canadian dollar is, if you look at the Bank of Canada, it doesn't have a lot of tools in its toolbox to fight a currency war. You think about gold is one of the biggest tools to fight currency wars. The Russians had a ton of it. That's how they defend the ruble. The Chinese have a ton of it. And that's how they defend the yuan. If you don't have other currencies to kind of fight a currency war, like, the war is over in a very short period of time. So assets, hard assets.
Which is why, well, I don't know if you're going to say this, but that's why natural resources are the key, because you got to give people a reason to come and buy your dollars.
Right, exactly. But if you say 80% of them need to stay in the ground, you've basically taken that asset off the table as well. So you have some assets to defend your currency. You have gold, and you have natural resources.
Yeah, and that's what the Russians, like you say, you talk about gold. They also used oil, didn't they, and gas and all the rest of it. They had insisted on selling it in rubles, and people laughed at that at first, but it's worked, hasn't it? It's helped prop up the ruble a bit.
Because if you remember when they first went to war with Ukraine, the Americans said they were going to destroy the ruble. And they tried with everything, because that is one of the first things you do, is you go after the country's currency. You talk about economic war, because it's not, like a real war like what they're doing with Ukraine is not very palatable for a lot of people. But a currency war, they went after the ruble, and you're right there. And the Russians said the only way you're buying Russian oil is with the ruble, which forced people to buy the ruble, which supported their currency. The currency, actually, the ruble actually did well and when it was supposed to get hammered.
Yeah, it did. Ironically, it peaked a bit, didn't it? After the invasion of Ukraine, there was like a spike in the ruble, which is completely bizarre. But it makes sense in light of that. It's because Russia is a gigantic landmass that has, and you often say that Canada is the best, most the richest resource nation in the world or whatever. But I would argue that it's actually Russia, because they just have so much, so varied, and just crazy amounts of gas and oil and gold and all the rest of it. But they used that, they leveraged that to prop up not just their currency, but their entire country. And I suppose the lesson there is, if you're self-sufficient in a material sense, in the sense of resources, like Russia is, and you've also got a good friend like China who you can sort of dump some things on and be helped by, then you are, to an extent, immune to the American financial institutions. But obviously, Canada, in light of that Ignatieff comment, Canada, for many, many reasons, is nothing like Russia. We are extremely vulnerable to those institutions because we're so dependent on them. We're so deeply embedded in that system. that the Americans could do, deadly, deadly damage to Canada.
I just put a chart in the document there. I wonder if see if we can get that put up there on the U.S. dollar versus the Russian ruble here, and we'll see if we can actually get that put up, because it's definitely they defended the ruble with oil and gold, and the one of the things that the Russians did way back when a lot of the economy, they were trying to infiltrate their economy too with the U.S. dollar to kind of have it one of the main currencies, is they created a Russian gold coin to mop up U.S. dollars and then send them back to America. They used gold. They created this Russian coin and encouraged people to use the Russian coin. Now look at that. Look at the ruble.
Yeah. Wow.
Go.
You can see that spike 2022 there.
Yeah.
That's the spike, the sort of middle one. Yeah, that's interesting. Very interesting.
That was
they
a-
also, they've got things that you just cannot do without. Not just energy, but they also have lots of food and fertilizer. They've just got everything, and it's really it's just you can't not have it.
Do you know what they have? They have the mirror of Canada. The difference is we don't want to use it.
Yeah. Certainly we don't want to exploit it to the extent that they've done. But I mean, that said, the Russians have their own pipeline problems. Like they don't have much of a system in place to get their energy down into China, and China's obviously now their main friend and customer. They kind of banked on, in their case, the Western pipeline. They banked on Europe to be their sort of customer.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that hasn't worked out well. And obviously, it's incredibly difficult to build any sort of infrastructure out there between China and Russia. But, at least I suppose your point stands, though. They eagerly exploit their natural resources, whereas maybe Canada has some misplaced ideas about saving the world or whatever.
Let's go into, we don't have anything in the tech sector this morning, but we do have some stuff in the auto sector. Slate, a new truck being offered up there, and this is Jeff Bezos is behind this, Slate Automotive, and there's been a lot of chat out there. It's an anagram or whatever. If you scramble the letters, and what is it? Supposedly this truck is a Tesla killer, and if you scramble the letters, you get Tesla. So Slate is this new $20,000. It's supposed to be like $20,000, $25,000 truck. $25,000. They at some point they were advertising it as $20,000, but this is an electric pickup truck that's going to come bare bones, like basically nothing in it, and then you can add pieces and you can kind of get it up to whatever you need it to be. But this is almost like a Chinese knockoff EV, very basic, and then there's a bunch of features you can add. I watched the big rollout introduction of this vehicle, and Jeff Bezos has been behind a few of these things, right? He was also got some money in the Rivian launch as well. And Amazon definitely buying a lot of the Rivian vans, electric vans for Amazon deliveries.
It's very cool, this little truck, though. It doesn't have much range, I don't think. It's like 150-mile range?
Yeah, no, it's like a Chinese knockoff vehicle. Like it's definitely, they went after that kind of model for somebody that needs something very light, and you can actually turn it into an SUV. It's almost like almost like a little transformer kind of thing, right? So you can buy these extra pieces for it, right? So
it's cool, though, and it does. I'm happy to see it because I feel like the EV sector in general has kind of been harmed by high prices, certainly here in Canada. So I mean, it's good to see them working on getting that price right down.
I think they're trying to get ahead of it too, because Tesla is supposedly announcing or launching a 25,000 or less EV as well, like a knockdown version of the 3 or the Y. So that's supposed to come out of the US too.
Right.
So they just got ahead of it there. House Republicans are looking to put a $250 annual fee on, no, we're not there yet, $250 annual fee on EVs. So there you go. California has passed that too. Like quite a few states that have this registration. I think Alberta wants to do it as well, to help pay for some of the roads and stuff, because EVs typically aren't contributing through the gas tax. And then in response to this, people saying that this is the death of Tesla, the account put out a little tweet saying, Tesla has been pronounced dead many times. We'll be just fine. Thanks a lot. I don't know. That was just Wendy's is quite a vocal account too as well when you talk about that. But Dan McTeague put out this tweet here. This was after a Conservative MP, Jamal there, tore a strip off of Doug Ford there, right? And
Apparently that's JD Vance's best friend as well.
Oh, there you go. Tore a strip off of him and talked about his failed EV manufacturing and $10 billion in debt incurred for pay for this green energy scheme, right? So there you go.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to be, the people who support the Conservative Party in Ontario and federally are going to be so disappointed, aren't they, in this rivalry that's developed.
There you go. You put this in, it just got into the wrong section, but we do have something in the ChatGPT section, so I'll let you go with this one. Like ChatGPT, pumping your tires.
Yeah, I mean, it's because there's a meme went round. A meme did the rounds where somebody was talking to ChatGPT about having paranoid schizophrenia and all these kind of hallucinations and everything, and then said, "All right, I'm going to stop taking my meds." And then that'll make everybody shut up. And it was really threatening sort of crazy language. And ChatGPT, which, people have argued has become way too sycophantic and phoning in recent updates. It was oh yeah, great. Good for you. You're making it I can't remember what he said exactly, what ChatGPT said exactly, but it was something you're taking life into your own hands. Good for you. So,
definitely,
I think that was the straw that brought the camel's back.
If you can ask it, if you're feeling down, if you're feeling down about the elections, you can ask it to pump your tires, and it will. Just be careful when you say pump the tires, and it say, "Well, I don't have a compressor," but because I think I heard somebody say that, and it's just what shall I use to pump your tires? There you go.
That's hilarious. Well, I repeatedly say to mine, I say sort of challenge me, don't just accept what I'm saying. And I've said some slightly less kind things to it as well, to try and get it to remember, not to just lean in to whatever I'm saying. Because there are some times where I'll start a conversation, and it didn't used to be like this. I have to say, it used to be a lot more fun to kind of argue with it. But recently, it seems like I've started a conversation and I've expressed an opinion. Or no, sorry, I've just expressed a fact, an objective statement, and then it will express an opinion, and then I'll reject that opinion, and then it's oh yeah, you're right, bud. It's just no, I don't want that. I want you to argue with me, Mr. ChatGPT.
And we're in our meme section where we have a little bit of fun, so don't be so offended here. But the Babylon Bee celebrating Mark Carney. 9 changes Prime Minister will bring to Canada. We've got the list here, and you're going to love them, right? Assisted. This is again in the meme section. Assisted suicide now available at Tim Hortons. Americans will be jealous of this convenience. Tim Hortons is no longer owned by Canada, though. Maybe that the Babylon Bee people don't know that. I don't even know if I want to say the second one. But double the size of Canada's military to 12. It's important for Canada to be ready in case Trump attacks. I mean, I think that's fair. The means of maple syrup production will now be seized for the proliferate, and class society can now be established by equitable redistribution of maple syrup reserves. There you go. Glory to the Communist Republic of Canada.
For the proletariat, that says, which is how Lenin justified himself, the dictatorship of the proletariat.
There you go. See, I didn't even know that. There you go. Learn something new every day. Change the national anthem to the Lumberjack song by Monty Python. You're going to love that, right? And the good old Monty Python. Sometimes it feels like we're in a Monty Python skit, it seems like. And we're a Shakespearean tragic comedy. And establish a war monument in case Canada ever wins a war. You never know, it could happen someday. Well, I mean, we were part of the winning team for the second and the first, were we not?
It's an enormously ignorant and stupid statement from airheaded Americans that don't seem to understand that while their country was sat there spineless, self-interested, and selfless in 1939, 1940, and 1941, the Canadians were all in
Yeah, we
because they
actually
were
got,
brave enough to do the right thing, unlike the Americans.
and we also got the shit jobs when they said, like, who can we get to storm the beaches of Normandy? And the Canadians put up their hand, we can do that.
Yeah, and the British as well. It was an Anglo-Canadian dominated affair, that D-Day. And yet, obviously, courtesy of Steven Spielberg, now all the deluded Americans think that it was just them.
And the Russians would claim that they're the ones that won the Second World War as well. And that's part of Putin's anger and anxiety over the whole thing. He says it was Russia that won that war.
Well, that's the great debate about the Second World War, isn't it? You can speak about that for weeks on end without ever taking a breath. Like, would Russia actually have won without the help of Britain and the US and Canada and all the rest of it?
Well, they definitely
Many say no.
They weakened the Nazi Germany, though, with the weather in itself did it.
Yeah, well, they did the killing. They killed the Wehrmacht. They killed the German army, which wasn't really on the cards on the Western Front. But the argument is whether or not they could have done it without the support of the British and Americans, because so much materiel, food, tanks, trucks, all the rest of it was sent there to the Russians so that they could keep on fighting.
I think this is the most important one of all. This is what Canada can actually claim as one of the greatest Canadian things, you know, because we spell humor differently, color differently, and it looks like with Carney, we're going to get to spell elevator, author, and dictator differently. Dictator would be a really good one to spell.
Elevator. It looks French, doesn't it?
Well, there you go. So there you go. So we're going to add the U into all of those, and like, why not? I think that would be our contribution to the world. I mean, because we're not going to contribute to the economy, it seems like. Verts advanced several exciting new hoaxes against the Catholic Church. Oh, well. There you go. And this one here, I think a lot of people will see this one. Work closely with President Xi to bring Canada under the watchful protection of the glorious People's Republic of China. Have a big brother watching you is so comforting.
Yeah, that's
brought
bit
to
on
you
the
by,
nose, isn't it, that one?
Brought to you by the Babylon Bee. And then one more. Kamala is supposedly going to speak, and then there you get to listen to it for free. But if you want, this is a fundraiser for the Democrats, is you get to $25 and $25 if you want to use the mute button.
Now that's funny. I think the other one there, those about Canada, they clearly don't understand Canada, do they? They've embarrassed themselves a little bit, but this is amusing because it's what they know.
There you go. I do like the color one, the elevator and the author and the dictator.
Yeah. Dictator.
Dictator. That's our show for today. We do appreciate you tuning in, especially our regulars all the time, and we hope that you share and enjoy the content on The Really Big Show. We try to bring you something that's a little different than what you get from the CBC or CTV. The protectors of our Canada. Bill C-18, we're going to mention this in every show. Bill C-18, still ongoing. We asked our reporter, Kent Mulgad, to go out there and ask Stephen Fuhr, now that he's been elected here locally, if he's going to put that towards Mark Carney and see if we can get that repealed. And then I know that during the Kelowna Chamber event here, the question was asked and said, yes, it needs to be done. And then the answer was not as positive this time around, though. There you go.
Well, we can hope.
Bill C-18.
The only thing is, it's not a priority. We know it's not a priority for Mark Carney because he never really said anything about it. So that's the problem. I think a lot of the time they might agree with the point that you try and make, where you petition power, so to speak. Often the powerful will agree, but it's just not a priority, and they only have a limited amount of time, and only a limited amount of space to get what they need done.
That was in Pierre Poilievre's platform to repeal Bill C-18 and fund independent local media, and to remove the funding from the CBC and spread out that funding. And also, it would be good to get Facebook back so that we can inform our community when we face the inevitable wildfires that will be returning to our valley at some point.
But also to offer our witty banter takes on Canadian politics.
There
I
you
think
go.
we have quite original takes at times. Or maybe they're not original, but in terms of the media landscape in Canada, not many people are making the sort of comments that certainly you make.
There you go. With that said, we do thank you for watching Now Media. I'd like to ask you to share, like, subscribe, do all those things. And we'll see you tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Up until then, cheers.
We don't just report the news, we live here too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all of us. No government funding, no outside influence. Kelowna Now, local, independent. News you can trust.